What happens when two men from opposite ends of the internet end up selling the exact same thing? One is in a silk robe, pouring cacao under the full moon. The other is in a Bugatti, yelling at women to make him a sandwich. But underneath all the spiritual window dressing and alpha male chest pounding, they're both selling power, control, and the illusion of freedom. And this is the strange intersection of Aubrey Marcus and Andrew Tate. And to really understand what's going on here, we have to talk about spiral dynamics, a psychological model that maps levels of human consciousness and explains why people think, act, and lead the way that they do. Aubrey and Andrew, they may look like they're in different galaxies, but in spiral dynamic terms, they're actually dancing on the same floor. They are just wearing different types of masks. If you haven't seen my full breakdown on spiral dynamics, I highly recommend watching the video first or right after this one. It'll help you see what stage each of them are operating from and what happens when a leader pretends to be at a higher level than they actually are. In this video, we're not here to cancel anyone. We're just here to get some clarity, to pull back the curtain of performance, whether it's spiritual or alpha, and to ask ourselves, why do we keep giving our power away to the men who say they have the answers? Now let's jump into it. When we zoom out and look at Aubrey Marcus and Andrew Tate through the lens of spiral dynamics, we start to see something fascinating. On the surface, they're total opposites. Tate operates in red and orange stages, focused on domination, power, material success, and unapologetic self-interest. On the other hand, Aubrey performs what looks like stage green, the heart-centered, inclusive, emotionally open tier of consciousness. But the longer you watch him, the more it starts to feel just a little bit funny. Not because green is fake, but because Aubrey's performance of green often slips into the shadow of orange. And that's where things become a little bit slippery. Aubrey talks about sacred union, divine masculinity, and sovereign leadership. He sits in ceremonies, uses plant medicine, and often speaks in poetic metaphors. He uses terms like initiation, warrior, light work, and inner child, and it's all very beautiful, and in many ways, it's also very helpful. But behind the language is the same core idea that Tate is pushing. You follow me, and I'll show you what it means to be a real man. Where Tate uses intimidation and control, Aubrey uses intimacy and enlightenment. But both offer a power structure built around their own authority. They are the ones who have seen the truth. They are the ones who have already faced the darkness, and they are the ones who can guide you through your own transformation. And that's not inherently bad. We all have to learn from people that are further along the path. But the danger comes when a performative green mask is used to cover up an orange stage ego that still craves power, praise, and control. And that's why you'll hear Aubrey speak so much about love and connection, but then watch him steer the conversation back to his own spiritual superiority. It's the illusion of heart-centered leadership without the humility or true surrender that green consciousness requires. And look, this isn't to say that Aubrey is evil or manipulative. I used to follow him for a very long time. I've learned a lot from him, but it does show us how spiritual language can become an armor, protecting us from actually evolving beyond the ego. And when masculinity becomes a performance, even a sacred performance, we lose the contact with the truth. Because real masculine maturity, it isn't about how many plant ceremonies you've sat through. It's not about having a goddess wife or launching a spiritual brand. It's about how you treat people when no one's watching. It's about your ability to listen without control, lead without needing to be followed, and love without needing to be worshipped. Aubrey may be using words of green consciousness, but his delivery, structure, and public persona still live in the orange-red loop of personal branding, curated transformation, and ego-centered leadership. And this is something we can all learn from, because the moment we start speaking the language of a higher stage without embodying the lessons of that stage, we create dissonance, a fracture between who we are and who we pretend to be. And that's where the shadow begins to grow. One of the most emotionally confusing things about watching Aubrey Marcus is that he seems to be incredibly vulnerable. He'll cry, he'll break down in front of the camera, he'll talk about betrayal, heartbreak, psychedelic purging, and shadow work in vivid, intimate detail. But here's the question we have to ask. Who is the audience for this vulnerability? Because real vulnerability, the kind that actually transforms, it doesn't need to be seen. It needs to be felt. And too often, what we're witnessing with Aubrey feels like a rehearsed reveal, not a raw one. And in spiral dynamics, this is the shadow of the green stage, when emotional openness becomes a new performance, a way to build influence, gain followers, or manipulate the perception of healing. In other words, it's emotional exhibitionism dressed up as authenticity. It's the same tactic as Andrew Tate, just flipped inside out. Tate avoids emotions to signal strength. Aubrey shows emotions to signal depth. Both use emotional expression or suppression as currency for power. And now, to be fair, it's entirely possible Aubrey does feel those emotions, He's not faking sadness or grief, but that is not the point. The real danger is when we start to monetize our healing, when we process our deepest wounds on stage in front of an audience with perfect lighting while selling a retreat or podcast or book deal. That's not transformation, that's just content. And it teaches people, especially young men, the wrong lesson. That masculinity is now measured by how publicly you can cry. The healing is now validated by how well it can be packaged and shared. That being open is just another branding tactic in the performance of conscious masculinity. This is how emotional intimacy becomes emotional theater. And when that happens, you're not healing, you're just rehearsing. Again, the spiral dynamics lens is very helpful here. Aubrey is trying to move fully into green, a world of empathy, wholeness, and emotional honesty. But if the foundation of your identity was built in orange, a world of achievement, personal branding, and success, then your healing becomes a product and your pain becomes marketing material. This is why Aubrey's vulnerability often feels more curated than cathartic. It's not because he's lying, it's because he's still centering himself in the story instead of letting the emotions just be what they are, without needing an audience, without needing an applause. And this isn't just about Aubrey, it's about all of us. How many times have we shared something vulnerable online, not because we needed to process it, but because we wanted to be seen as brave? I know I've done it plenty of times, and this is why I could see it in other people. That's the shadow of performative healing. And when we don't recognize it, we repeat it. So what can we learn here? That emotional expression is not the same thing as emotional maturity. The tears can be totally honest, but still be manipulative at the same time. And that healing isn't something you need to prove to anyone. It's something you live quietly, deeply, and even imperfectly. Now, let's talk about brotherhood. Aubrey Marcus loves this word. You'll hear it across his retreats, his podcast, his fit for Instagram circles of conscious men, gathered in saunas, jungles, or high-end retreats in Austin, speaking of purpose, shadow, and the divine masculine. And on the surface, this all seems very beautiful. Men coming together, not to dominate, not to compete, not to destroy, but to support, feel, and expand each other. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll start to notice something strange. Everyone looks the same. Everyone uses the same language. Everyone agrees with Aubrey. And in my opinion, this isn't true brotherhood. This is brotherhood with brand alignment. And where's the conflict? Where's the pushback? Where's the truth that disrupts instead of flatters? This is where the shadow of the green spiral stage reveals itself again. Green wants community, wholeness, mutual understanding, but when unbalanced, it becomes groupthink, a culture of emotional safety that avoids real challenge. In this kind of brotherhood, you're safe as long as you say the right words. Alignment, consciousness, heart-led leadership. But if you challenge the core hierarchy, you risk exile. Just like Stage Orange had its corporate boardrooms and yes men, Green has its cacao ceremonies and yes shamans. The illusion of egalitarianism masks the very real power dynamics at play. In spiral dynamics, true evolution from orange to green requires letting go of ego as identity. But if your ego becomes a spiritual identity, the healed man, the wounded warrior, the warrior poet, then you haven't evolved. You've just redecorated your ego and slapped a shaman feather on it. And that's what makes this brotherhood look a lot more like a rebranded boys club than a crucible for genuine growth. And here's the thing, brotherhood without truth is just performance in a group setting, and support without honest reflection is just enabling with incense. And what would real brotherhood look like? It would be messy, uncomfortable. It would challenge each man to see his shadows, not just celebrate his archetypes. It wouldn't be a circle of men praising the leader for being vulnerable. It would be a space where even the leader gets lovingly called out when he's performative, evasive, or bypassing truth. Because here's the paradox. You cannot call yourself a healer if you've surrounded yourself with people who only reflect your light and never your shadows. So, what can we learn from this? Number one, brotherhood must be earned, not branded. That healing spaces must make room for discomfort, not just affirmation. And that a truly conscious man isn't the one who speaks the language of healing, it's the one who could take a hard truth from someone who has nothing to gain from it. Now let's step into the most emotionally charged space of all, relationships, or as Aubrey Marcus would call it, sacred conscious partnerships. At first glance, this all sounds very noble. Love that liberates instead of confines. Partnerships that grow through shadow work, truth-telling, and non-attachment. A brave dismantling of the old paradigm, the codependent, traditional monogamous relationship. But let's take a pause here because something in these conversations feels off. I just looked at these podcasts, I listened to them, I read the comments, and we all know that something is off. In Aubrey Marcus's world, love is free. but somehow he always gets to be the one receiving more of it. Whether he's exploring polyamory, redefining marriage, or showcasing his wife's new partner on a podcast, there's a pattern emerging. The narrative always centers around him, even when it's not about him. So let's break this down. In the most recent episode featuring Vailana and her new partner, the tone is clearly framed to say, look at how conscious we all are. There's no drama, just love, healing, and celebration. But if you watch closely, you'll see the micro expressions, the subtle power dynamics, the silent tension. Who's still hosting the podcast? Who's still holding the mic and controlling the narrative? Who's getting applauded for how gracious and enlightened they are? It's Aubrey. And this is not a judgment of polyamory or Vailana's choices. People are allowed to evolve and relationships don't have to follow rigid models. But if we are truly honest, what's being sold here is not freedom. It's curated liberation. It's controlled chaos in service of a brand. It's a relationship style that's been spiritualized to such a degree that any pain, discomfort, or unmet need gets reframed as a healing opportunity instead of a valid emotional boundary. And that's where we step back into spiral dynamics. At the surface, this appears to be a move from blue, which is traditional order, to green, which is inclusive love, but the hidden motivator underneath it, still orange, still ambition, still branding, still hierarchy. And when green is infected with unacknowledged orange motives, you get a performative display of compassion and liberation, but the emotional cost is real, and it is usually carried by the less empowered partner. In this case, Vailana appears to be thriving, and that is beautiful. But why does she still need to do it on Aubrey's podcast? Why must her new love story still be filtered through his frame? If this was a truly rebalanced, sacred evolution, wouldn't she be allowed to fully leave the house of his identity? These are the hard questions, but they are also important because what we call conscious relationships can quickly become unconscious theater when no one is allowed to say, hey, this feels unequal. So what can we learn from all this? Well, number one, true love isn't always about expanding boundaries. Sometimes it's about honoring limits. That growth doesn't always mean saying yes to everything. Sometimes it means walking away from what no longer nourishes your soul. And no matter how beautiful the words sound, power imbalances can hide in the language of love. And until we're willing to name them, we'll keep confusing performance with transformation. So what do we do with all of this? Aubrey Marcus and Andrew Tate may seem like polar opposites. One cloaked in plant medicine, divine feminine worship, and open-handed sovereignty, and the other in Bugattis, cigars, and hyper-masculine dominance. But underneath it all, they're both selling a story, a myth, a self-concept designed to elevate themselves above the crowd, as teachers, leaders, as exceptions to the rules that they ask others to break. Whether it's polyamory, self-mastery, healing through sex, or redefining masculinity, both men are essentially saying, follow my version of truth, and you too can transcend your pain. But real healing doesn't look like transcendence. It looks like descent into your own contradictions, into your own mess, into the parts of you that don't want to be watched, liked, or admired. And this is where meditation can become medicine, because meditation isn't another performance. It's the exact opposite. It's where you sit quietly and humbly and just let all the masks fall away. You meet your shame, you meet your rage, you meet your sadness, not to fix it, not to reframe it, not to brand it, but just to see it. And when you do that, you begin to feel what's real, not what's marketable. So if you've been on a healing journey and felt confused, manipulated, or discouraged by the influencers, the teachers, or the spiritual performers out there, you're not crazy. You're just waking up. And if this video resonated, share it, comment, subscribe, not to just boost the algorithm, but to remind yourself, you don't need a spiritual brand to be spiritually awake. You don't need to be famous in order to be free. And you don't need a podcast to speak your truth. You just need presence, courage, and a willingness to see yourself, not the performance of who you think you should be. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you more than you all know. And until next time, stay awake, stay honest, and stay real.